So you're thinking about making an anime livery? Why? Well, if you're that inclined to do it, come on now. Now you might think to yourself, who is this guy? What makes him qualified to tell me how to make an anime livery? Well, don't focus on the fat anime titties. You ain't ready for that yet. Trust me. Baby steps. We'll be getting there. First, you'll need to look deep inside yourself and figure out how much sanity you're willing to give up in pursuit of art. I'll tell you now, this is not an easy road. You're going to fail. You will hate your first creations. You will see every mistake, and other creators are going to see it too. Especially me. But they're going to be too nice to say anything. Welcome to being an artist 101. If you're only looking for clout, this ain't for you. You can stick to your single color, basic ass default text, I like my cars clean looking ass. Kinda cringe, not gonna lie. Well, in this video, we'll be going over the process for TC2. Well, at least my process, that is. Yes, I have played Forza, but I'm not too familiar with it. I only just dabbled in Forza, but a lot of advice in this video can also be applied to other games as well. Alright, moving on from the intro, we're going to be figuring out how we're going to trace your waifu. There's many ways to go about this, with varying levels of technology, ranging from the caveman strat of just taping pen and paper to your monitor, to letting AI place your shapes for you. We're going to be aiming for somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, where we want to follow the subject as closely as possible, while also taking artistic liberties and deciding which details we want to include or exclude. Let's do a quick overview of the methods we have at our disposal. Well, method 1, printer paper. Just print out the image you want, slap it on your monitor, tape it up, and just try to approximate where the shape should be going. Not the worst idea, but it's definitely not the best. Method 2, grids. This is art class basics, but you might be wondering, how is this grid going to help me copying an image into the game? Well, if we just start eyeing shapes into place without any reference to shape or scale, we end up having things looking way out of proportion and just looking wrong in general. In art terms, you're drawing what you know, not what you see. Now if we place a grid over the image and our workspace, we can then focus on one square at a time. With our grid as a constant reference, we can now stay in proportion, with the added benefit of scaling up or down our workspace. But what if a lot of the image is fairly basic, but the face and eyes have a ton of detail? Well, we can go a step further and have some squares split into halves or quarters. Essentially, we're just making a grid inside of another grid. Kinda big brain, right? Method 3, overlays. This is easy mode. We're just following the lines. By far the easiest method, and perhaps produces the best results. The downsides to overlays is coming back to a piece that you've been working on, trying to line everything back up, but this can be minimized by placing basic shapes around the image in an image editor like Photoshop, GIMP, or anything else. The other drawback is no zooming in, but this can also be minimized with the basic shapes being placed. Other than these downsides, overlays are the easiest. For this method, we're going to need a Windows transparency program. I happen to use Ghosted because that's what I stumbled upon. Many other painters seem to use Glass 2K. That seems to be the flavor of choice. I won't be linking any downloads for these programs, but I will put the names in the description. With any unknown program, you need to do your own due diligence. Stay safe, King. Now you might be asking yourself, how do I use this method if I'm on console? Well, in short, you really can't. I mean, we can, but we have to use remote play. This still requires a PC, so if you have no access to a PC, method 2 will be your choice. In this video, we'll be using overlays. Now that we have our methods of choice, I know you already have an image in mind. Now don't get too excited and start jumping ahead. We're still crawling. Like any job, you need to learn the process and get familiar with the tools you'll be working with, i.e. the Livery editor, the overlay software, and your image editor. Rather than jumping straight into a character portrait, we're going to start on sponsored decals. Trust me, I know you just want to jump straight in. No, stop. Put away that borderline NSFW gravity defying tits. Like, how do they even live like that? I mean, I didn't even know they made thigh highs with waist size openings. Like, Jesus, just sit in my face, mommy. Now then, we're going to start with this AEM logo, the classic yellow and black outline. The assignment is to make 2 versions of this logo, one with color text and another one with just the outline. Now then, let's open up a program of choice. In this example, I'll be using Ghosted. I'm just going to activate Ghosted and open up my image. Now open up the system tray and right click Ghost it, Ghost, then click on the window you want to ghost. Now let's right click on Ghost it again, Configure, and now we can mess around with the opacity. I would typically recommend setting your inactive window between 30 or 70, but this is pretty much personal preference. I would recommend having your active window set higher than your inactive window, so you can tell if you're tabbed into your image or not. Now let's size up our image to fit in the workspace. Now we're going to put on our thinking cap here. TC2's livery editor only has 1,000 shapes, so we have to be smart with our shapes. So the main point of this assignment is shape efficiency. We want to use as little shapes and groups as possible in whatever we're making. Alright, to start this AM logo, we want to use as many sides of the square as possible. So we're going to match the top and bottom of the square, and we're just going to skew and play with the size left and right. We can use the bottom and the top and the left side of the square. Now we're going to do the front part of the A with one square. We're going to size the square with the bottom of the A. We're going to match the size of the whole logo vertically. And then we can skew into shape. Now we're going to take a trapezoid, and we're going to do the same thing for the back of the M. Now we just have one sliver left for the M. There's a lot of shapes we can use here to fill in this space, but I'm just going to use a square. Now what I'm doing here is zooming in to see if I have everything lined up. And it looks like it's good. Now that we blocked out the whole thing, I'm going to group it, copy, paste, and change the color so it pops out from the black. I just put the transparency of the other shapes so I can work shape by shape, rather than try to mess around with all of them being visible at once. We're going to start adjusting the colored pieces to match the yellow text inside now. Now I'm just messing around with the front half of the A. The skew doesn't change height, so I put the shape to height and then mess with the skew afterwards. Sometimes it is faster to just start from scratch rather than doing what I'm doing here, but it's all personal preference. Now since this logo actually has a black outline, I'm trying to actually overlap a little bit onto the black rather than just being inside the lines. I'm changing some of these shapes to white because it's a really high contrast color, so I can see what I'm doing. I can see if I'm overlapping the black outlines. Mainly trying to adjust the height first and then skew. This is where the little things of graphic design come into play, things that normal people wouldn't notice. A lot of these logos aren't geometrically perfect a lot of the times. If you look at the Google logo, that's not a perfect circle. It's kind of the same thing here. So we're going to have to add some fill shapes later on. I know the bottom pieces for the M are being covered by this, but we're going to use triangles to overlap the colored bits, so I'm not too worried about that. This is kind of the more lazy way, but we can get away with it here since the text is on the foreground and there's a black background. Now for the A, I don't have to do this. Depending on what you're going to do with your logo could be super tiny and no one would notice. But I like to consider myself a perfectionist, so I end up doing it. I'm just zooming in to make sure all the edges are flat with each other. Since when you do have it small, you'll see those. You'll have little pixels sticking out. It'll make your logo look messy when it's downscaled. Now here, I'm just overlapping some black so I can get the E shaped out. Now we could have done this another way, where the A could have been two shapes. We could have done the E in 4 shapes with the rectangle for the front of the E. Then we could use 3 rectangles for the other parts of the E. You can kind of just block out the shapes in your head since this is a very simple shape. You don't have any curves or anything to work with. Now I'm just going to finish out the M. I wouldn't worry about doing the R. You wouldn't be able to see that when you do end up scaling this down. And now we're pretty much done with the filled in AEM. One thing to note with groups, whenever you group any amount of shapes, it adds one layer to your layer count. So before you group it all up to save to your library, you want to ungroup everything, and you want to group it all at once, and then save to library. For if we just grouped it when it was 3 separate groups like that, you would have been adding 3 layers that are unnecessary. Since I group the shapes when they're super huge, I hit the limit for scaling down, ungroup and regroup everything back again. It'll let you keep scaling down afterwards. The reason why the logo is so huge is because I have the livery editor zoomed all the way out. If I do any type of zoom and then I put my image and line it up and start placing shapes, if I accidentally hit any type of zoom, it's going to be almost impossible to fiddle around with the triggers to try to readjust back into focus basically. You would have to just adjust your source image. So to avoid all that, I just keep the livery editor zoomed all the way out, make the image as big as possible so I could zoom in. But if I zoom all the way out, my shapes are placed exactly back with the image if I didn't move my image at all. Now that we have our filled logo, we can then knock out the outline version. We're going to speedrun through this, but a lot of it's pretty much the same. It's just now we're working with thinner squares. You just match up the length with the bottom edge, and then skew left and right to get the angles at the end. Pretty easy stuff. Same principles as the fill. As I said, just smaller shapes now. The most difficult part is this indent for the A. Now I'm trying out a couple of ways here, but it doesn't look like it's going to work the way I'm thinking. I wanted to do this in just 2 shapes, but it doesn't look like it was possible. At least I didn't find a way at the time. I'm going to use a triangle here. I'm going to use 2 more squares to connect the bottom edge with the triangle. Now I have these shapes in red so I can tell them apart from the ones I already have set. That's the only reason for the color difference. So this bottom of the A and the top of the A is not perfect, but when it's scaled down, those little imperfections can sometimes amplify, or sometimes they can be hidden. It's a case-by-case basis. Now for the top of the M, the left side of the V is at such an angle where I can just do this in 2 shapes. For the bottom of the A, I couldn't do that since the point of the angle was way too tight. Now this is where your attention to detail comes into play. It's up to you to determine how perfect you want everything to be. Sometimes it's not worth being super precise, but other times it will be. It all depends on what you want. I like my logos to be as accurate as I can be, so I end up trying to match all the corners pretty much as close as I can. But due to how you move shapes, it's kind of hard to align up everything super precisely. I ended up limiting my stick movement in DS4, so I can move shapes by 0.01. In my experience, filled in crescent shapes are terrible. They always look kind of bad downscaled. I don't mean downscaling in the 2D mode, I mean downscaled when it's on the car in 3D mode. Alright, now I'm going to do my final check. I'm going to close the image, I'm going to downscale the shape and look around to see if there's any gaps. Now it looks like there's a small gap on the bottom of the M, and I'm going to fix that right now. Instead of adjusting the original shape, make a copy of the shape that's a contrasting color, and then adjust the original shape on top of it. And you can flip back and forth to see if you have the new shape to the same size as the old one. Now I'm going to delete the white, group everything back up, and save to library. For this next part, it's just a little tip. I like to size my logo right in the middle and make it 2 squares high. And then I ungroup and I regroup and save it to my library. So whenever I select it from my library, I can downscale it pretty easily from there. Another thing about shrinking is you only have a range of 100, but you have it just about infinite when you're upscaling. So it's better to save your logo small to upscale rather than to save your logo big and then downscale. Just a 2 shape difference between the filled and the outline, that's not too bad. Now that we have our first company logos done, we can knock out a few more easy ones to get some more experience. Toyo Tires, Pirelli, HKS, some easy examples. This will help you get more familiar with the livery editor. It'll also start filling out your library of stickers. Now here at level 2, this is mainly just self-study, but the main focus is learning all the shapes. Learning what shapes can be skewed into what other shapes, As I said before, we want to use as many sides of the shape as possible. For circles, that's kind of hard to do, since we're mainly using it just for one side. Let's say for arms, we can use oval shapes for the forearm, but for level 2, we're just training more for shape efficiency. Usage of shapes is paramount in TC2. We only have 1,000 shapes. Those shapes fill up quickly. A good rule of thumb for a full anime character, you don't want to go past 800. You want to go 700 or down, 700 being practically the maximum limit, because 300 shapes is not a lot when you start adding decals in. Groups are another thing that kill shapes. I mean, for example, we can take 2 shapes, group those, and now it's counted as 3 on the layer counter. Now we can add one more shape, group that, and now it's counted as 4, even though we only have 3 shapes in that group. The 2 times that we grouped it, that counts towards your layer limit. Groups are very useful for organizing, but when you are going to save your final shape, ungroup everything and group it all at once. Because when you start working on bigger projects, you can end up saving 20 to like 50 shapes just off of groups. Doing colors for TC2 is very awkward, since the fine-tune option in the game doesn't correspond to the color wheel, so you can't take an HSV value from the game and input it into a color wheel and it would match. The game has its own in-game saturation filter, and there's some color mumbo jumbo happening when you do adjust the in-game brightness. If you're not at default, the colors will look different for everyone else that downloads Livery with their colors. Like I just recently went through that. Finished my Rio decal, I had the game brightness turned up. When I turned it back down, I color matched the colors with the game brightness up. The colors look good on my side, but if someone else downloaded it, the colors were way too saturated for my liking. So I put the brightness at default, and I end up going through the decal and recoloring it all again. So what I do to pick my colors is to open up my image in GIMP, use the color picker tool, move the color picker window over my game, and just start fine tuning from there. You can get an approximate. If you want to get more exact, you screen cap the shape you're trying to color match, and you copy it into GIMP, and then you color pick between both of them, and then you adjust in-game, screen cap again. You just go back and forth with each of the colors. But this process is for mainly getting accurate colors. If you're just trying to go for approximate, you can just open up the image in the Windows image viewer and try to match it from there. I wouldn't recommend it. I don't like it because the color environment is different from TC2. GIMP opens up the image in the right color environment. I don't know if I'm explaining this right, but that's how I see it, because the colors end up being washed in the Windows photo viewer. But anyways, that's my process for color matching. Another thing we can go over is how the game handles points, especially when the decal is on the car. Take this example. We're going to use this crescent shape. We're going to make the same crescent shape with 2 shapes rather than just the one. And then we're going to scale, and you'll see just the one crescent shape kind of become blunt on the points, while the one with 2 shapes doesn't blunt out like that. This is just a weird quirk. For example, the eyebrows could be done in one shape, and this would look good in the Livery editor. However, in the 3D mode on the car, the eyebrows might end up looking extra thick, especially when you're downscaling. We can counter this by having 2 shapes instead of 1. This is going to be a decision between quality and shape efficiency, because you'll be using 2 shapes instead of just the 1. Depending on where you're going to be using the decal, and if it's going to remain huge, because at a certain point, the quality of using 2 shapes versus 1 shape will equal out at a certain size. So you could get away with using just 1 with it remaining high quality. An example where I took this to the extreme, like I wanted super clean lines, was for this Mary decal. Since the forehead was so big and the eyebrows were in full view, I could do it in 2 shapes, and I layered the line art in the hair, so all the points in the line art wouldn't be blunted. I can downscale this and it won't look like ass. That's just an odd quirk with how the game rasterizes vectors, I guess you could say. Now that we have some skills, we can start on our magnum opus. Yes, now it's time to pull out that image. Now you might be tempted to start on the line art and then fill with color, but we don't really have many shapes that can do line art very well. So it's better to do the line art as a background and then put the color on the foreground, in most cases at least. Ow. We're finally done. We made it. And now you're a degenerate. But you know what? We made that happen together. I'm proud of you, son. I want you to carry on my legacy, to continue putting questionable content on the side of cars for many years to come. so that the next generation can develop the same shitty taste in waifus. Now get out there and make it happen. Sometimes it gets hard to be alive, and you know that better than I do. Better than I do. Sometimes you get somewhere else to go, somewhere that nobody can find you. No one will find you. Do they want it somewhere that you don't have? And thank you for coming to my TED Talk.